Welcome to the Vitamin Professor podcast, brought to you by VRM Media, publisher of Vitamin Retailer and Nutrition Industry Executive magazines, in partnership with Nutraland USA. I'm your host, Dr. Gene Bruno, Professor Emeritus of Nutraceutical Sciences and Chief Scientific Officer at Nutraland USA. The purpose of this podcast is to help educate the dietary supplement industry about the science of nutraceuticals and other relevant topics. If you like what you hear and see, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, I have to tell you, I am especially excited about my guest today, who happens to be my very good friend and the co-host for my other podcast series, The Bioactive Nexus. This is the first time I've had him as a guest on the Vitamin Professor podcast. So let me tell you a little bit about him. With a PhD in natural products organic chemistry and about 30 years of experience in the natural products industry, Dr. Bill is recognized as being in the top 100 innovators and entrepreneurs. He specializes in translating the intricate science of wellness into tangible solutions that resonate with consumers. Throughout Dr. Bill's career, he's honed a diverse and comprehensive skill set that spans the entire product continuum, from spearheading research and development initiatives to overseeing formulation, product development, regulatory affairs, quality assurance, manufacturing, operations, clinical research, and commercial launches. Dr. Bill has played a pivotal role in shaping the success of numerous consumer products across various channels. He's the CEO and founder of NutriSelect.ai, an app utilizing precision supplement intelligence to help you choose the right supplements, grounded in clinical research, personalized to your biology, and rated for real results. Dr. Bill is also on the scientific advisory board of Nutraland USA. It is in that role that he is a guest today, talking to us about tomato phytomelatonin from whole fruit tomato extract. Welcome to the Vitamin Professor, my dear friend Bill.
Gene, after that intro, man, holy cow!
I know, right?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Yes, I'm a jack of all trades. Actually, Renaissance man. That's what everybody calls me. I've done everything. There's a big long laundry list there you didn't even cover. So anyway, but I've been in the industry a long time.
I know. But you have.
Yeah. So, but excited to be here, man. So let's get into it.
Let's jump into it. Sure. So let's start with just a couple of basic things for our listening audience. Okay. So first question: what is melatonin, and what are its roles in the body?
Okay, great. Well, it's always good to start at the beginning, and I think a lot of people have heard of melatonin, of course, because it's a commodity ingredient in the supplement industry, of course.
It is, yes.
And having also been at one point the global R&D lead for the mental wellness category, I covered the sleep category for Sanofi. So we covered the whole melatonin market globally there, which there are different regulations, of course. But melatonin is a hormone that's produced by the body, and it's best known for its relationship to the light-dark cycle. So like when, in fact, when it starts around dinner time is when it kind of kicks in. You see an upregulation of melatonin in the body when the sun goes down. So it's
right.
signaling the body to get ready for sleep. It coordinates the circadian rhythms of the body for sleep. And most people may or may not know, but it's synthesized from tryptophan via serotonin. And it's with aging and reduced exposure to natural light, it affects the production of melatonin. In fact, you do produce less melatonin as you age. But functionally, melatonin helps regulate your circadian rhythm, your timing, your sleep initiation and maintenance, and then it has other broader endocrine signaling tied to nightly physiology.
Very good. So, now that we have a good understanding of what melatonin is and what it does, second question is, what is the value of supplementation with melatonin?
Well, as I already mentioned, it is true that as we age, our body produces less melatonin, and we all know as we get older, it's harder for me, Gene. I don't know about you, but getting a full night's sleep would be great. If I could sleep 8 hours, I'd love it, but it usually is broken up. But part of that has to do with melatonin. So supplemental melatonin has been widely studied. As I said, I was the global R&D lead for Sanofi when we were leading all that, and particularly for reducing sleep onset latency, which means how long it takes to fall asleep. And that's a difficult thing for a lot of people. And also improving the perceived sleep quality at the end of the day.
Yeah, a lot on that, for sure.
And in some cases, the total sleep time. So the reason is that many people struggle with initiating sleep, and that's where melatonin can provide benefits. And there's a lot of research on this. Now, I think in terms of dosages, we can highlight that. There's a lot of research on 0.5 milligram for jet lag, 1 milligram for sleep onset, like we're talking about. 3 milligrams, it's kind of a bell curve, Gene, in terms of research out there. So at that 3 milligram peak, that's the sweet spot for where we start getting into not only sleep onset, but sleep quality. And beyond that, of course, there are higher dosages of that, but not a lot of research value add there in terms of that. Now, in the Somato pilot, which you guys ran,
well, hold on to that thought for a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, hold on for that for a minute. But I do want to expand for a moment on something you said. We were talking about dose.
Yeah.
I don't know about you because you live down in Puerto Vallarta, so I don't know what it's like in the stores down there. But certainly up here, you walk into a drugstore, a supermarket, wherever, and you look at the shelf that has melatonin, and I don't know. What do you find is the most common dose? I'll tell you, I find 10 milligrams as the most common dose nowadays. How about you?
Yeah, I've seen everything there. And of course, U.S. and Canada, the monographs, you can have up to 10 milligrams is okay. But if you go to France, 2 milligrams and up is considered a drug, okay? Mm-hmm. And whether that's really it's of course not really based on the science or the research so much in terms of regulation. We all know that, but I think it's important to call out, Gene, that melatonin. This is a misperception, I think, by people who use it. It's not a sedative. Okay, it's important to call that out. So more is not necessarily better in that sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. And again, the research doesn't support it anyway. And as I said, it's like a bell curve. Right. There's not any,
more isn't better.
Yeah, if you go from 3 to 5 milligrams, there's a few studies around 5, even less around the up to 10. But the reality is that there's no added benefit to really taking more. So, and that's because people think it's like a sedative, and they I'll take 10 milligrams, do it. But no,
more is better. But it's not. But we're in a country where it's like supersize me for everything, And they're always using a lot more of whatever. If 2 milligrams is good, then 10 milligrams must be better. My goodness, you can go on to Amazon and see 20 milligrams and more.
Yeah,
it's crazy, and it's so unnecessary. So that's one of my soapbox issues. I like to get up on the soapbox and say, stop using these high doses because it's really not. It's not more beneficial. So
I'd add one more thing there.
Yeah, go ahead.
I worked very closely with a lead sleep researcher in the U.S., and we talked a lot about this. He also helped Fitbit design, the sleep, what do you call it, programming or whatever for Fitbit. So, but again, melatonin is really just it's more like a timing cue to help the body transition into sleep. That's all it is. It's not a sedative. So I just want to make that final point.
Very good. Thank you for that. Now, I think in our industry, there's a perception that because it's in a dietary supplement, that melatonin, most of the melatonin you see out there is a natural substance. but the fact is that it is really not. It's really synthetically produced, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when people think that they're getting something natural, they're not. Now, on the other hand, there is your conventional synthetic melatonin, and then there's phytomelatonin. Could you explain the difference between those?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, chemically, I'm a natural products chemist. This is a natural product.
Yes, you are.
Melatonin is still melatonin. Doesn't matter where the source comes from. It's still chemically the same molecule. All right. But there are key differences between on source and different cofactors that can be involved, right? So conventional melatonin in supplements is typically synthetically produced. Right? We did a lot of research about this when I was with Sanofi, of course, and again, from a sustainability standpoint, it's probably, most people don't know it, that people think the melatonin they're getting in supplements is natural, right? And this is the challenge if you're selling a phytomelatonin, I think, is because people think the melatonin's already natural to start with, right? So you have to really call out what are the key differences there. But again, phytomelatonin means it's plant derived, right?
That's right.
And so on the phytomelatonin side, plant derived sources can include naturally occurring compounds that could have complementary effects. So like tomatoes from tomatoes, right? So there's small quantities of lycopene, for example. I think you guys called that out in the paper. Yeah. So anyway, it's like I think you called it an entourage effect. So you have these other players there, albeit not in huge quantities, but it's primarily melatonin. But I think the really important part is if I don't think people realize what the synthetic process is to produce melatonin. It's quite a long chemical synthesis with a lot of byproducts. A much cleaner way to go with this is obviously with phytomelatonin.
Yeah, it is. And I might just add to this discussion that one of the primary methods for producing synthetic melatonin, it's been cited in the scientific literature that it yields a number of other chemical compounds. Not high amounts, like 0.5%, but one of those compounds is called peak E. Now, peak E, I've been around long enough in this industry to remember in the late 80s, I think it was 88, something like that, when there was a contaminated batch of tryptophan that came from Japan. And this contaminated batch of tryptophan created an analog of tryptophan. It wasn't actually tryptophan, it created an analog. And it also produced this peak E.
I remember that.
And that peak E caused eosinophilia myalgia syndrome, which actually killed some people and made other people very, very sick. And for a short time, it was just, tryptophan was kind of removed from the market.
I remember that.
Because of that. And it came back, but only at a very limited amount. And then after the passage of Deshay, you could have it at normal amounts again. But tryptophan itself was never the culprit. It was this peak E that was produced because of this analog of tryptophan. Now, fast forward.
Side product,
Yes. So fast forward, in producing synthetic melatonin, you get a little bit of this. Now, to be clear, it's nowhere near enough to cause any problem. All right, people have been using synthetic melatonin safely and effectively for many, many years. However, when you start saying, 10 milligrams, maybe I'll do 20, there's people out there through Amazon are using products and they're using 60 milligrams. And there's some doctors who are using with their cancer patients, because there's research on this, higher doses of melatonin. Does that mean like 50 and 100 milligrams? Okay, so that leads to the question of, well, wait a minute. How much peak E are you getting now? Is it enough to cause a problem? And in one of the studies published, recommendations from researchers were to doctors who are using these high doses in cancer research, don't use synthetic melatonin. Use phytomelatonin. It's safer and you're likely to get a better result. So I just wanted to expand upon the idea that, again, if you're using synthetic melatonin, you don't have to really worry if you're using, doses of, probably 10 milligrams or less in terms of peak E. But if you're using high doses, there could be a problem. And wouldn't it make sense to use something like a phytomelatonin that the other compounds with it are actually beneficial? So just tossing that out for good measure.
And I think in terms of melatonin, if you're marketing a brand, if you're listening to this as a marketer, there's key points of differentiation, and we had a lot of discussion about this when we were looking at the phytomelatonin. Actually, long before you were with Nutraland, Gene, I was talking to San Ying about phytomelatonin at that time in sourcing. That was from the St. John's wort that you have. But,
and St. John's wort is an interesting one to mention, because if we talk about the difference between conventional synthetic melatonin and phytomelatonin, we did see a difference. Do you remember when you weren't on our advisory board at the time, but I think I told you about it, about the study we did on phytomelatonin, and in which we had 4 arms. We had placebo, 1 milligram phytomelatonin, 3 milligrams phytomelatonin, and 10 milligrams of synthetic. And this was, and the phytomelatonin was from our Som Natural. That was the one derived from St. John's wort.
Right.
And so what was really interesting is if you looked at some of the different cohorts, there were like 3 different cohorts, 3 different groups of people who, in which the 1 milligram and the 3 milligrams, the 1 milligram or the 3 milligrams of phytomelatonin performed just as well or better than the 10 milligrams of synthetic melatonin. And so it goes to show you, again, that natural isn't always better in terms of performance, but sometimes it is. Sometimes the natural performs better. And so to me, again, that's something that's worth considering when we go, what's the difference between synthetic melatonin and phytomelatonin? That's one of them. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Somato. Can you explain to our listeners what Somato is?
Yes, and happy to do that. And if I had the little rubbery tomato and a target on the wall, I could throw it on there.
Yes, you could. We did that at the last trade show. We had a little tomato you threw on a target on the wall.
That was a lot of fun, actually. Could take out some
Didn't
frustration.
you bust one of those? Didn't you throw it and it broke open? Was that you or somebody else?
No, it did stick on there pretty hard, though, because I did wing it.
That might have been Sun Ying.
Maybe, yeah. Oh, maybe that's after so many times hitting the wall it started to break apart.
Yeah, probably.
That was pretty clever if you think about it, throwing tomatoes at stuff.
Throwing tomatoes.
Especially ripe tomatoes.
Indeed.
Splat. But anyway, I think we've said it. Tomato, it comes from a tomato fruit extract. And by the way, tomato's a fruit. It's not a vegetable. Okay,
it is. That's correct.
A lot of people think it's a vegetable.
Botanically speaking, it is totally a fruit.
It is totally a fruit. Anyway, but tomato is a fruit extract from the tomato, and then that's the phytomelatonin. Phyto meaning plant. Derived from the Latin there. And do you want me to talk about the study here, or
we can talk about that in just a minute.
Okay.
I just wanted to. A lot of times people ask, well, how many tomatoes does it take to make Somato? And so one of the things that I like to just point out to people is it takes about 10 medium-sized tomatoes to make 20 milligrams of Somato, which is equivalent to 1 milligram of phytomelatonin. So for every 20 milligrams of Somato, you get a milligram of phytomelatonin.
So, so I could eat 10 tomatoes before bed each night, and I'd have
you could get a milligram.
Yeah,
well, assuming you indeed would get some phytomelatonin out of that. We use a particular variety of tomato that is a particularly good source of that.
Oh, yeah.
But to your point, there's actually been 2 studies on one study on just using tomatoes before bedtime, in another study where they used a tomato powder in capsules before bedtime, and found that it actually had some benefit in helping with sleep latency. So, there was enough phytomelatonin present to be helpful.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. So
there's
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you reminded me of something. There's a nutrients review paper that talks about the amount of melatonin in numerous food sources. And
yes, plants produce it. Yeah,
and plants produce it. It's ubiquitous, actually. Which kind of begs the question. This is kind of a side note. Why would a plant produce melatonin, right? That's kind of fascinating to think about.
It is part of their light-dark cycles, and it has to do with things like leaf morphology and the development of the plant. And if you think about how in humans it affects endocrine patterns,
right,
it does sort of the equivalent in plants, and it helps in their development. And another fascinating thing, Bill, is some countries. I think you might have mentioned this earlier, but some countries, melatonin is not a dietary ingredient. It's not a dietary supplement. It's a prescription drug.
It's prescription
and you can't sell melatonin over the counter.
No.
But that's also one of the interesting things about Samedo. Samedo is a fruit extract. It is a tomato fruit extract. And we have had some very, very positive results when we've had partners in different countries who were interested in introducing Samedo, and they would provide all the information we gave them, and they would show it to their local version of the FDA in that country, and they've had very good results in getting it approved to sell. They can't call it that it's a melatonin supplement per se,
right,
but they've been often able to say this is a tomato fruit extract with naturally occurring phytomelatonin, and they can even say the amount. They can't say what it does, but everybody knows what melatonin does. So we've had people in some countries do gangbusters.
That's a creative way to approach that. This is an appropriate time to mention this, I think, as an aside, because it fits into this. As you know, Nutraland USA is our first founding partner with the Science Accelerator with NutriSelect.ai.
That's right.
Samedo's on the list for going through the N-Score rating system. So we're really going to elevate the knowledge base. Again, remember NutriSelect, we're building an intelligence platform. So around melatonin and phytomelatonin, which you guys, you're supplying your data sets, we're going to be able to expand on that. And really, I've always had this vision that our platform eventually is going to be instructive to regulatory bodies. You just called that out, where in my opinion, in France, where it's 2 milligrams as a drug, and a lot of EU, that's ridiculous. In some places, it's only 1 milligram. So it's really crazy that it's not so much based on the science. And clearly, it's not based on the science in terms of dosage and being harmful and that kind of thing. So I'm excited about that, and you guys are going to lead the way with that. I just want to call that out. I think that's cool.
I appreciate that, and that is a good segue into the next question.
All right.
Which is, what research has been done on Samedo? Can you address that?
Sure. I think I'll break this up into two parts. There's a study you did, of course, which we can get into, but I think. We've already mentioned this, that tomatoes contain a measurable amount of melatonin, and actually many plants do. There's a certain genus species of mushroom, I can't recall what it is. It has a really high amount, actually. But again, there have been human trials, clinical trials, where tomato consumption or tomato extract was associated with improved sleep outcomes. So there is some research out there, and again,
indeed, there's a precedence. Yeah.
There's a precedence for that.
You know what? I just wanted to interject. You mentioned about other plants or sources of phytomelatonin, which they absolutely are. The interesting part is only some of them are commercially viable to do a plant extract of them. So while there are many plants, that not all of them are suitable for the supplement industry. and not all of them are from a source that is, that doesn't have common allergens in them. Okay, so let's jump into the actual tomato study.
Let's do that. So it was a 28-day pilot study, decentralized, open label, single arm pilot. Okay, there were 35 people enrolled, 22 in the final analysis, and the mean age was 42, I believe.
Yep.
So it was the dosage form was an oral strip containing 2 milligrams of phytomelatonin from the tomato fruit extract. Okay. And you guys had a number of ways to measure the primary outcome. So you used the Aura Ring, which is cool. I gotta get me one of those.
They are cool. And by the way, one of the main reasons we did that is while we liked subjective measures, having an objective measure that wasn't reliant upon the subject's interpretation.
Actually, I had a question for you on that. Did you choose the Aura Ring purposely, or because there's Fitbit, Garmin, there's other?
There are many of them. One of the reasons we went for Aura Ring is that it's very well documented, very well respected, and we even went so far as to require, I think, something like the Aura Ring 3, a specific iteration of it that we made sure everybody was using the same thing. So there was a apples to apples, or in this case, a tomatoes to tomatoes comparison that you could do and make sure that it provided consistent information across the board. And it's been something that is generally considered scientifically validated. So, we went for that one. At the time, the CRO we were using recommended it. We looked into it, and we agreed that was a good choice.
That's cool.
Not the only choice, but a good choice.
No, and the technology's gotten pretty sophisticated to use wearables and a lot of clinical research for supplements now. It's really, if you're not including that as part of it, you should. Anyway, then the other two measures you guys did for the tomato study was PSQI, which is the Standard Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index on subjective sleep quality. And then you also did a SF36 health-related quality of life domain. So you took some measurements there. But in terms of the results, and again, keep in mind it's a pilot study, but definitely instructive to do a larger study. There were significant improvements versus baseline in sleep latency, which again, that's the sleep onset. And that was the result both from the PSQI and the Aura Ring as well. So time awake, sleep efficiency, and the global PSQI score, on that. And then also the SF36 showed a significant improvement in emotional well-being with positive directional changes and several other domains. However, those didn't reach statistical significance. I think the most important ones were really around the sleep latency.
Yeah, and by the way, just to make mention of this, each of the ones that you mentioned were all statistically significant changes that occurred. And furthermore, although this was a pilot study, it had a decent size of 22 subjects, and because these were regular users of the Aura Ring, we had data available to us looking back a month prior to them even starting. So although it wasn't placebo-controlled or a controlled study, in a sense you could look at it as having that kind of background a month prior and being able to compare it, which makes it a much stronger pilot study than is just a standard.
That's a good point.
Looking at baseline and looking at the end points there.
Yeah, that's actually actually a cool point, because that's not something normally you get from a pilot study, right?
That's right. And so and each of these things were really meaningful. I mean, and so we were pretty darned excited about it, and it also kind of validated what our experience had been when we had been giving Tomato to people. Mm-hmm. And people have been reporting really, really good results, just fantastic results. And so we were thrilled with this. And so, we said, to your point, this was a pilot study. now we've actually have a new randomized controlled clinical trial underway on Semedo. Have I talked to you about that? I can't remember.
I don't recall, actually. I think you said...
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so in this one, we're going to do, it's pretty large, 240 adults.
Oh, great.
We have 3 arms, Semedo, synthetic melatonin, and placebo.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going to use the same endpoints as you saw in the pilot study.
Right.
Plus, we're going to look at an additional one, which was morning grogginess, because we've had reports from people using Semedo that, unlike some melatonin, where people will refer to it sometimes as the melatonin hangover, like the next morning they'll be groggy, that they weren't experiencing that. Now, whether that's because that the dose was lower, 2 milligrams, or whether it was for some other reason, they weren't seeing this. So we want to now measure that in this study. So we're pretty excited about that particular one.
Yeah, there's a lot of research around melatonin and next day functioning in terms of this growth.
There is, yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's important to call out that a melatonin is not a sedative. This is something you do see with sedatives. You have that next day morning grogginess. Some of it's not really well understood in terms of the mechanism. But again, I assume you're going to have all the same dosage here across the board. Of course,
we are.
Of course.
In this case, we are. Yes.
Yeah.
And we're gonna do that.
Yeah. So you're comparing apples to apples, and that'll be interesting to see if there's any statistical significance between the phytomelatonin and synthetic melatonin. That would be kind of cool to see.
Yeah. So to see see how Semedo phytomelatonin works versus that. Synthetic. Yeah, I mean, I and look, I have been a big proponent of melatonin use for many years. There's some populations it's particularly valuable for. As you know, my son, who is just about to turn 27, is on the autism spectrum. He's and so for Asperger's, and he for years as a kid, would have trouble sleeping. And of course, there have been studies on kids on the autism spectrum using it. And so we, worked with his pediatrician and said, we're planning to try this. And we looked at it and we did. And we found that for him, it made a big difference. And then my own wife, she's, ADHD, and there's been studies on it for ADHD, and she's had good results for it. I haven't had, throughout my life, problems necessarily falling asleep. Sometimes I'll wake up and have trouble getting back to sleep. Although these days, I think it's mostly because we got dogs sleeping in the bed with us. And if I wake up and they see it, they get excited and come over, start licking my face. And I'm like, no, dogs, go lay down, So, but yeah, I found for so many people, and most of the time, I don't know about you, when people come to you and say, hey, what's natural that I can use to help me fall asleep? If you don't know anything else about them and you don't have the time to sit there and go through everything, I don't know about you, but my go-to is start out with a melatonin. That's what I've already said, and not a high dose.
No.
I actually have a friend who's a rabbi who he came to me and he was asking about it. And I said, let's start you with 3 milligrams, see what happens. He goes, man, I'm so groggy in the morning. I said, okay, let's drop it down to 1 milligram. He did that.
Yeah.
He's been on 1 milligram for years, works like a charm for him.
Actually, it's good. It's an important point because there are some people that don't tolerate melatonin. It's been shown in the research, and causing that next day groggy for whatever reason. It's interesting. So you always build into it. Start with 1 milligram. Then you can go to 2, and then see how it goes from there.
Yeah, and honestly, aside from the obvious marketing advantage of saying I have a natural melatonin, this is from a whole food source, all of those things are great from a marketing perspective. I think there's a real, actual, tangible benefit from using the natural source. There are all these other compounds present, like you mentioned, Semedo. You have some small amounts of naturally occurring lycopene, as well as a little bit more of GABA and some other compounds that, it has been cited in the literature that phytomelatonin sources often have these other compounds, which seem to show greater effectiveness. In one study, not done on ours, just one that was published years ago, where they were comparing some effects in vitro on phytomelatonin versus synthetic melatonin, they found that the equivalent amounts was more effective at reducing C-reactive protein in the phytomelatonin than the synthetic. And for those who don't know that are listening, that's an inflammatory marker. So basically, we know that there's some value in melatonin that has some anti-inflammatory effects, but apparently in this in vitro study, a lab study, the phytomelatonin was more effective, about 4 times more effective in reducing that. So I think that one of the advantages of using natural sources is that you do have some of these other entourage compounds, let's call them, that may have other benefits that go along with them. And so I'm when it's possible to use natural sources, there's some things out there that are not commonly available naturally. A lot of people aren't aware of it, and probably there's those out there who don't want me to say it, but most of the B vitamins that you find in products nowadays aren't really from natural sources. They're synthesized. However, again, they're chemically identical to what you find in natural, but it's like, for example, if you said pantothenic acid, I want a natural source. Well, if you want to extract it from one of the richest sources, you can go to cow's liver and you can extract it and you get a teaspoon of it. It'll cost about $20,000, or you can create it synthetically for pennies.
Well, and actually, you probably are aware of this as well, because this came up in my area of research for over the years, is that a lot of companies for these commodity type ingredients now are producing them, these nutrients through fermentation. And so
they are.
Yeah, and so like
some of them are doing that.
Yeah, BASF is doing that in a huge way. And there are some other companies that are ingredient companies that are producing these commodity ingredients from fermentation.
They are, and part of that whole argument too is, does that make it natural? Like if you take tryptophan and you toss it in and you ferment it, and at the end of that you've created some melatonin, is that natural? Kind of. One could argue it one way or the other. But there's no question that if you make a plant
there's no chemicals. There's no chemicals. I'm a chemist. Synthesis. It's not being chemically synthesized. It's biologically being produced in a different organism versus the body, right? So to me, it's
right.
It's a way to look
at
it.
Could very well be. Yeah, one could certainly make the argument that that's.
We had a lot of discussions about this when we were looking at different sources.
Well, sure, but as somebody with a background in herbal medicine, I'm always a big proponent of using plant extracts when possible. I've seen the benefits over the years. So and people have been using tomatoes for thousands of years pretty safely, around the world. So
I mean you're talking from a food source, so it's good.
Yeah. So my last question to you is, do you think I left anything out in my questions? Is there anything else you want to add, or you feel like we kind of covered it?
I think I think we covered everything, man.
I think so too.
Yeah, we did.
And hey, thank you for being on here, because while as Chief Scientific Officer of Nutraland, I could certainly have talked about this, I can't interview myself, and so it was great to have you on as a member of our Scientific Advisory Board, who's been privy to a lot of this research. It's been a lot of fun interviewing you. First time.
That's cool. And happy to be here, Gene. Support you guys, of course.
So
it's a great ingredient. It's a great ingredient and great approach. And I think the biggest differentiation, if you're a product brand, is you're going to get some. You're getting something that's from a plant source, so it is truly natural. The challenge will be in differentiating that with your consumers, but if you talk about how it's produced and it comes from tomatoes and all that kind of stuff, and educate your consumers that every melatonin other product in the market is pretty much a synthetic. That's a huge, and you talk about sustainability, all these kinds of features.
Sustainability. Thank you for saying that. I forgot to mention that tomato is made from upcycled tomatoes. So
even
meaning
better.
that
Even better.
instead of just picking a tomato from the plant, taking it, making an extract, we're using it as part of tomato materials from the food industry, who's using tomatoes to make, tomato sauce, tomato paste, pasta sauce, et cetera, tomato juice. Those industries will use the tomatoes, but there'll be a lot of the tomato left, and so we take the sum total of that, which represents a whole tomato, and we upcycle it. And that upcycled material is used, albeit from a specific variety of tomato, but we use that, which makes it highly sustainable and is consistent with the Nutraland motto: "Good for you, good for the earth."
Yeah.
So
that's a really key differentiating point from a marketing standpoint for product brands, is that it's an upcycled as well, which is really cool.
So, Dr. Bill, thank you for being my guest today on the Vitamin Professor. And folks, if you like what you heard and saw today, don't forget to like and subscribe. So we will see you next time on the Vitamin Professor.